What up? This is July from Kickback Couture, and today I will be talking about the EQ section on the mixer. Gonna drop down my transport, and let's open up the EQ. Now, I am playing a guitar. It's a loop, more so Midi loop right now, from UJam. It's a virtual guitarist, and it's called Silk. The first parameter on under the EQ section on the board is the EQ window, which the spectrum EQ, which can be resized to however big you would like it, and this is the smallest it goes depending on your screen. Gonna keep it down to about this area here. The next thing on this EQ is a low pass filter. And as we can see, it lets the lows pass and cuts off the highs. You can also hear it. The further we bring it to the left, starting at the right, makes the signal less bright. We can bring it all the way down to 100 Hertz. The next button is the high pass filter, which lets the highs pass and cuts out the lows. This results in making the sound thinner, all the way from the left moving to the right. Command click on a Mac to get back to the original settings, and Control on a Windows, I believe. The next thing is this filters to dynamic sidechain button. This is going to disable the high pass and low pass filters. The reason for this is because they will now be altering the signal of the sidechain signal that you decide to send to this specific channel or whatever channel you're working on. So this can be used for frequency sensitive compression. So if I have my kick and my 808 and I want to sidechain them, I can set it up to where when my kick hits, only the low frequencies of my 808 are compressed, or ducked, or however you would like to view it, and I can have my high section of my 808 unaffected for the most part, and the high section could be the distortion or whatever the case may be depending on the 808 you have. But I will do a video for that in the near future. So turning that off, moving down, we have the high frequency EQ. So in order to enable this, we need to hit this on button here. High frequency gain. So let's go to this one. I keep accidentally moving over to the wrong channel strip. So this is the high frequency gain. This gives you a shelf, and you can do a low shelf or a high shelf. And we also have this bell option, which changes the EQ mode to a peak rather than a shelf. And we can also change the center frequency with this knob here. Same if we had it in shelving mode. Whoops. I can also move the frequency. The next option we have, or the next set of knobs we have, is the high mid frequency gain. This is the green point here. We could change the center frequency here. And this is the Q, or bandwidth. So the higher we go, the thinner it gets. As we move to the left, the wider it gets. Gonna command click on a Mac, control click on a Windows to get those back to the initial default settings. Next we have our low mid frequency EQ option, and this one is going to be blue. Let's put this back on. 200 hertz to 2K. And we can also adjust the Q here. Thinner, wider. And then down here at the bottom, we have our low frequency EQ, which is a shelf, just as this was a shelf, until we hit the bell button and it turns into a peak. Alright, cool. So we've officially gone over all of the knobs on the channel strip. So let's talk more about the Spectrum EQ. As I mentioned before, it can be resized. Now you can use the Spectrum EQ to set your EQ settings without even looking at the board if you would like to. And I'm just doing random things to the signal here, nothing specific, just so that you see it's fully capable of changing the shape of your sound within the Spectrum EQ. As I mentioned before, command clicking on a Mac or control clicking on a Windows computer will get each individual point back to its default position at 0 gain and the default frequency. So as you hover over these points, you get this area right here that will tell you what you're changing. So this is the low frequency EQ, this is the frequency it's at, this is the gain. Low mid frequency EQ, that's the Q it's set at, 1.33, and it tells you right here you can hold down Option and drag to set it. So if I want to move this up, hold down Option and I can change the Q. Gonna command click to get that at the default position of 0 decibel gain. This is the high frequency EQ. Right now it is shelving. This is the low frequency EQ. Right now this one is shelving. We could do a high shelf or a low shelf. And once we hit these bell modes, they turn into peak. Now, these are pictures that will help you figure out what corresponds with what on the board and the mixer. You can view these in the Reason manual anytime you would like to. In fact, the vast majority of the context of these tutorials on the mixer are based off of the manual, so I do not give you any incorrect information or misguided information. And I know a lot of people do not like reading the manual, so this is a visual manual in a sense. If you would like to constrain the movement of a particular point, holding down Shift will help constrain it, and it won't be as free. So if I hold down Shift, we see the big jumps if I move too far. So if I hold down Shift and move from left to right, I don't have to worry about big subtle jumps in my gain. Whereas if I want to move up and down, I don't have to worry about big subtle jumps in my frequency. So once again, I'm just holding Shift to do that. So that just makes things a little easier when you want to EQ something or change the frequency you're EQing or the gain without manipulating the opposite value. Now keep in mind the signal flow is very important. This this EQ is going to run before the fader, which means that if you use any type of insert effects like distortion or a separate EQ, it's going to affect the signal that comes through here. So just a quick demonstration of that. Gonna make this window smaller, move it up. If I add some type of, let's say, saturation, turn it up. Just gonna fix this here. We see an increase in low frequencies as well as high. So bypassed. And back on. Now that may not be a very desirable sound. I would not use that in production, not necessarily in that form. But this is just an example. Now if I decide to use a filter, let's go ahead and go to, what filters do I have on here? We can just go to Pro Q. Now watch the low frequencies as I create a high pass filter. And let's go ahead and turn the bypass off here and bypass this. And we see that the insert effects affected the signal that is outputted by the spectrum EQ. So once again, this EQ happens before the fader. Now you can automate any of these options either on the board or in the spectrum EQ. Before you automate anything in the spectrum EQ, you want to make sure that you've already created an automation clip. So I have an automation now from right clicking on the high frequency. So if I open my spectrum window, we see that it corresponds to the red knobs. I can record automation here. And this can help get rid of a static feeling in your loops. Not that you would want to automate it this way, but automation in general results in such result. So if you like this video, give it a like, comment, subscribe. Most definitely let me know what you would like to see next. It's all culture, kickback, and cook up.